Welcome back to Reap Your Roots. Today's episode is going to be focused on an aspect of spirituality, of religion. Much of what I'm going to be talking about today, we jam about all the time within the free online space. Gnosis Rising, Gnosis, Gnosis Rising on the school platform. A space where all of you is welcome, all beliefs, all perspectives, all spiritual paths. We within that community find unity within diversity, within everybody bringing their own experience into it. Gnosis is direct experience, and it's the Greek word for experiential knowledge, direct experience, rather than knowledge that you would learn from a book or from somebody telling you that's true, and you saying, okay, I believe that must be true, without first seeking your own intuitive, experiential knowledge of that thing that you are learning. So that's what we're about, is direct experience. And today, the topic that I wanted to discuss is authority, and how we can, as people, reclaim our own spiritual authority, our own spiritual sovereignty, and build a direct connection to the divine, to higher power, rather than just taking people's words for it or relying on what we were taught growing up. May that be a certain conditioning or a certain program that we were given, and that before we even really had the ability to discern for ourselves or to logically process and figure out our own individuated viewpoints and beliefs, we just accepted that and rolled with it throughout our lives. Because what's happening right now in the world, and increasingly I'm meeting more and more people are reaching out to me talking about going through this awakening, spiritually speaking, of their beliefs, and really questioning and wondering and being curious about those programs that they were given as children, and seeing another point of view. As we grow up, we're exposed to more points of view, more beliefs, and there's usually two reactions to that. It's to be like, that is wrong, that belief system, that's not what I was taught, and holding fast to what you were taught. And the second reaction is curiosity, which is, I've never heard that before, that kind of belief system. I'm curious, that maybe even resonates with me. I'm interested in learning more. And I'm not here to say that either path is right or wrong, because I truly believe that everyone is on their spiritual journey, and their intelligence, their soul knows where they're supposed to be. And so while I do encourage the latter, as in the open-mindedness and the curiosity, that's just my perspective. And I don't think it's even absolutely necessary for everybody. I think that there are many paths to one truth, and I view all of the paths in which I've encountered, in which I have found good in, I have found God in, I have found truth, capital T. That is a path that you can go very deep in one path to find that one truth, and you can go also to many paths and several to find that one truth, which is, when I say that one truth, I am alluding to whatever word you want to use to describe God, higher power, meaning in this life, because we're in a meaning crisis today. And I think it's important that we prioritize finding meaning in our individual lives, and in also the greater cosmos and in the collective. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is authority. And I wanted to start with a story from my personal life. So I was raised, as many of you who followed the show, Mormon, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I was given the authority of God through this church and the paradigm that this church gives you, and the reasoning that they have behind why they have the authority over possibly other churches or other faiths. And I was inducted into this authority when I was 12 years old. And then there is a second authority that you receive when you become 18, when you become an adult, that the men receive. And formally, they receive it by the laying on of hands. And so I went on a LDS mission, a Mormon missionary, for 2 years. I was walking the streets of Peru and teaching a lot of Adventists, a lot of Baptists, and a ton of Catholics about the authority and about how this church that I represented had the actual authority from God, and how every other church that they were in was good, but it was just lacking in that authority. And this is, when you look back across time and across religions, especially within Christianity, this is a big topic for us as humans, is who actually has the authority to speak, to act for God. And it's been a debate, and it will probably eternally be a debate. And one of my intentions of this podcast is to highlight how silly this debate is, about how human this debate is, the authority of God and who actually has it and who can represent. And it is important when you look at teachers or gurus or apostles or prophets to really be able to have discernment and direct experience and gain a personal direct experience of who to follow as a spiritual leader, who has the authority. And I make this distinction of personal experience. Who has this authority for you on your spiritual journey? And when I was on my mission, if I would have heard that, I would have been like, well, it's just, it's for everybody, the same people. It's these prophets and these apostles in which I was raised. That's the authorities for everybody. Some people just don't know it, don't believe it, and they need to be converted, right? That's what you do as a missionary. Now, my perspective has definitely changed on this, on that each and every person has an individual relationship with the higher power, and they resonate with different spiritual paths and spiritual authorities, and that they can gravitate to those authorities, or even act or speak for their life and their stewardship, who are under their stewardship, in the name of God, with the authority of God, independent of if they found the right church, right, quote unquote, as in who has the actual authority. So rewinding it back to my mission, I'm in the streets of Peru, and I'm teaching this lady. We taught her for a couple of months. She was a Catholic. She was a single mom of 2 kids, and she had a lot of faith in Jesus, and she had a lot of faith in Mother Mary. She got a lot of strength from Mother Mary, being a single mom, also working. And so this was the saint that she had the closest relationship with. And this saint was the position of authority for her and her individual life and her individual spiritual journey. As a missionary, we were teaching Catholics all the time how you should not pray to saints, and you should pray to God the Father in the name of Jesus Christ. And we were also teaching through the Bible, because Mormons believe in the Bible. A lot of people don't realize that. We believe in the Bible, and also the Book of Mormon, which is another testament of Christ that speaks of a different people, not Jews or Gentiles, but peoples in the Americas. So, not to dive into all of that, but those are the books that we use to explain the authority and how this church that I represented had the authority restored. And that even though she was baptized Catholic, and she had a lot of faith in Jesus, she had a lot of faith in Mother Mary, she still didn't get baptized with the correct authority. And she was still praying to Mother Mary, which needed to change in my young perspective at this time, because she needed to only pray to God the Father in the name of Jesus and start investing her faith more in Jesus rather than anybody else. And so I remember we were teaching her for a couple months, and she read the Book of Mormon. She actually really liked it. She felt close to Jesus through it. She was coming to church. She really appreciated our lessons. A lot of it resonated with her. And we came to this crossroads where she was not willing to give up praying to Mother Mary. And she also didn't see the reason to be baptized in our church when she had already been baptized within Catholicism. And so we prepared this whole lesson as little Mormon missionaries on how we could explain that Jesus actually really, really cares about the authority, the right authority, and how she needs to pray in the right way. And we sit down and we share these powerful scriptures with her, our perspective and how we interpret those scriptures, because there's so many interpretations of scriptures. And at the end of it, she just looks at us and she goes, "Elders, gracias, thank you so much. But I'm going to continue to pray to Mother Mary. And I feel in my own relationship with God, I feel like my baptism was valid and that I have a relationship with God. I know I was really little at the time, but I feel like it's valid. And Mother Mary is someone as a single mom that I have a lot of faith in and that actually I have a relationship with. She helps me a lot in my life as a single mom." And I remember when she said that, I had a response different to what my belief systems would have instigated at the time. My belief systems would have been like, she's not progressing. She's not going to get in the right church with the correct authority. But what hit my heart, and I'm really grateful for this because it opened up my heart and my mind in ways that was like planting a seed for now, fast forwarding in my life now where I'm at, where it felt like the Spirit communicated to me, she is on her path. And she actually does have that relationship and that authority on her spiritual journey in the church that she's choosing to have complete access to God. As a missionary, and when you look at the doctrine within all churches, but especially within the Mormon church, that's not the thought that I should have had. That's not the feeling. The Spirit should not have communicated that to me, right? It should have been more maybe heartbroken or sad because she's missing out on the fullness of the gospel or the fullness of all of God's blessings, because those are reserved for those who get baptized with the right authority. And this is what the Mormon church and Christianity as a whole, religion in large part, is selling the majority of the time, is exclusivity. In exclusivity and fullness and promised blessings to their fullest measure are only available when you get baptized with this right authority. That's not what I thought, though. Even at the time as a Mormon missionary, I had this prompting, this what I could only describe as a spiritual experience of, she has access to the fullness of all of God's blessings, and it doesn't matter if she gets baptized or not. And that's what hit my heart. Now, my mind was like, I don't know if that makes sense. And it was actually bringing a lot of confusion to my mind because of the paradigms in which I was raised in and also teaching as a missionary. It doesn't compute. In my heart was telling me something differently, and the Spirit was telling me something differently. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this authority and how Jesus, Yeshua, as I like to call him, so that was his name, is interpreting, or how he referenced this authority. Pre-churchianity. There's a difference of Christianity, which is what I believe is following Christ and what actually Christ was saying and taking that at face value, or churchianity, which is the church's interpretation of who Yeshua was. And I feel like Yeshua is so disconnected from the image of Jesus is so disconnected from Yeshua because of all of the interpretations and the, like I said, human concern for authority and right and wrong and black and white thinking and westernized logical Roman influence and philosophical Western Greek influence into Yeshua's message. All of these different elements blending into Yeshua's message, which is what got us here today in a very churchianity environment within the U.S. and within the world. So, scripture I want to go to is Luke 22. And in this chapter, it's really a masterclass on authority, on kingdom authority that Yeshua was proclaiming to have and demonstrating throughout his life versus political authority or religious authority, which is what the scribes and the Pharisees had. And that's who he's having this exchange with. And when you think about it, in the time of Yeshua, who really cared about the authority? Was it Yeshua? Or was it the scribes and Pharisees? Who was always getting triggered and preaching right and wrong, and you can't do this, and you can do this, to people and to Yeshua and to his face? Who was getting extremely triggered? It was the scribes and Pharisees. Those were the people that really, really, really were concerned about authority and really emphasized that in order to get back to God and to be in good standing with God, you have to be, 1, following the rules, 2, obeying the church, the human authority, the creeds, the councils. You see this even later within the Creed of Nicaea and the other creeds that followed, which, by the way, the first 7 creeds of the church, Catholic Church, the first really Christian church, or churchianity church, had an emperor presiding over. And what do emperors care about? They care about authority. They care about their subjects obeying. They care about politics. They care about government. So for the first 7 creeds, there was an emperor presiding over this who obviously had that concern as he was ruling his subjects. And that had to have gotten influenced into those creeds. And if you study those creeds objectively, they did. And even in the reformations of the church, a lot of it was about who had this human authority and pedestaling these people, these reformers or these starters of each individual church, putting them on a pedestal and saying, oh, this guy actually he got the real authority. It happened even with Paul and the disciples and Peter, and that's why there was Mary Magdalene and Philip and Thomas. They were ostracized from the church because they weren't following the right authorities. It happened within Constantine, who, if you look into that story, ends up baptizing himself to unify church and state as an emperor, and also to make sure that the Christians weren't rebelling or fighting the government. And then it happens even within all of these other Protestant, Jehovah's Witness, Mormons, all of these churches have that one person that was actually the right authority, and they start to pedestal that person and outsource their own divine connection to somebody else, finding a middleman between them and God, which is all the prophets, apostles, authority figures, bishops, pastors, and it even, to some extent, can be Jesus or the Bible. That is something that's super common within churchianity. Anyways, that's a big old tangent, and I can talk a lot about all of that, and that's what we talk about within Gnosis Rising. So join if you're curious, or even if you want to challenge that belief, because love jamming about this stuff in a very cordial and respectful way. Mutual respect, right? Going back to Luke 22, there's a dispute happening among the disciples about who has the authority and the power of God. And they're all arguing, and they don't really see the point. They were raised in religious hierarchy by their rabbis, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. These people were religious authorities to us their entire lives. So it makes sense that they don't really see the point. And Yeshua cuts straight through the point in Luke 22 as they're discussing. Luke 22, for specifically verse 25, Jesus states, "The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors." So he's talking about a few points that we'll break down, like the lording it over. These kings of the Gentiles, or the Pharisees, or the religious authority at the time, are lording it over the people. And so they're demanding, even through force or coercion or fear or exclusivity, they're demanding obedience, and then they're asking to be called these certain names. They're actually giving themselves titles as benefactors, as spiritual authorities. And it's really common within the spiritual community, if someone is calling themselves a guru or calling themselves whatever title, and asking others like, hey, you need to call me this. You need to call me Guru Jake or whatever. It's really common for a red flag to go off and be like, oh, that is very prideful. But within the context of religion, it's totally okay. There's a pass. If you call apostles, prophets, even by their first name, and I've heard stories of this where other religious authorities like bishops or stake presidents, or even an apostle himself. I know a friend who has had an experience where the apostle really cut through to a group of missionaries and demanded to be called by his full name and elder, before, make sure he put elder before, because he was an apostle of the Lord Jesus Christ. Like a bunch of 19-year-old kids, like asking and really demanding this title be respected. And I get that. And I've got, don't get me wrong, mad respect for a lot of the spiritual authorities within the church, I was raised. And no matter what church, I have a lot of respect for all of those spiritual authorities. And I actually listen to their words and I digest them. And I feel what resonates with me and what level of consciousness they help me calibrate to. So going back, he's talking about these 2 points, right? The worldly authority is lord over, or lording it over the people. And they also demand titles: benefactor, apostle, prophet, elder. And it also highlights this worldly authority top-down dominance. So there's a hierarchy. And within all religion, this hierarchy is in place. And I think it's important also for human systems to have a chain of command, especially if they're leading an organization or leading a business, which a lot of people argue that a lot of churches are business organizations. They definitely have a lot of KPIs, a lot of metrics in which they want to be hitting all of the time in terms of tithing and growth of their people and their population. And it's all good intentioned. It's all to save humanity. It's all within that paradigm of saving humanity. So I'm not judging it, but there is just the structure of it almost elicits this top-down authority, which Yeshua is saying in Luke 22 that top-down dominance is not the way of God or the way of authority. But in the world, that is how it's set up. And it's the old adage of, like, you can't really fix a broken system. When the system's broken, you're just going to keep running into the same issues and the same problems. And that is, I don't even know the answer of how to fix that aspect of the system, of that these organizations, need organization. I think there are ways to do it, and I don't really think that there will be a reformation of religion anytime soon. Hopefully there is. Hopefully there's a reformation of within a lot of churches about this top-down dominance, and whether it can be the hierarchy or whether it can be what turns into, and what you'll see in Yeshua's model, kingdom authority. So, to summarize, just so you're tracking, worldly authority is they lord it over the people, like he says in Luke 22:25, demands top-down dominance, demands titles like benefactor. The Pharisees demand that they be called certain things. And he also says a little bit earlier in Luke, they like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces. And I'm sure a lot of church authorities, prophets, apostles, pastors, they love that as well. I'm sure that it feels really, really good to be greeted with respect because of their position. That's worldly authority. Now, the kingdom authority, and this is where Yeshua corrects the disciples and makes them really think, because they're talking about the different power and authority and the great stature that all of these rabbis have that they've looked up to for so many years. And Yeshua just totally flips it on its head. And he says, the one who has the most authority becomes like the youngest. That is the greatest among you. He calls a child into the circle, and he says, be like this child, which in the status or stature of society, children are at the bottom, right, of the totem pole. They're able to be controlled. They're not really contributors to society. They're not to be looked up and respected just naturally. And he says, become like the youngest. He also says that the kingdom authority governs by serving others. He applies it to taking the role of a waiter. Luke 22:26, he says, you are not to be like that, as in the worldly authority, demanding respect and titles and top-down dominance. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who is at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. So he totally flips it on his head using these two analogies. One, be like a child, be like the youngest. And then two, be like the waiter, be like the one who serves. When you look at someone on the table and the one who is serving the meal, you would think that the one at the table has more authority. But then you looked at the life of Yeshua, and he's demonstrating kingdom authority as the one who serves. And he demonstrates that throughout his life. You see him reject a lot of the most important commandments and rights, rules, eating grain on Sunday, ordaining women into his ministry, having women followers, talking about healings on Shabbat, all of these different ways that he's going against the grain, and he's doing it very intentionally. Not just for the Sadducees and Pharisees, but he's doing it very intentionally for us. Now, having these stories and reading Luke 22 and comparing it to the churchianity that we have today, there is a clear distinction. And objectively, I can see that there's a lot of aspects within the church and within churches that are really aligned with the Sadducee and Pharisee worldly authority and not really looking at the way that Yeshua is asking for authority. And to be fair, there is a lot of kingdom authority within churches. There is a lot of service. There's a ton of service. There's a ton of good. And by me highlighting the hierarchical structure, I don't want the argument to be, well, no, because my experience of the church is that they do serve and that they're doing so much good in the world. And I agree with all of that. That's why it's not an argument for me, because I agree with all that. Both can be true, right? There can be a lot of good getting done. There can be a lot of service. And there can, like I said, be a lot of respect for spiritual authorities within churches, pastors, bishops, prophets, apostles, religious, spiritual authorities. I have a lot of respect for. And at the same time, the system is created in this hierarchical way, in this top-down dominance, in this demanding titles, demanding respect, and in this, I know better than you what your journey is, what your spiritual path should look like. And this takes me back to my mission when I was talking with this woman who claimed that she had a spiritual relationship with Jesus, and she wasn't willing to give up her spiritual relationship with Mother Mary, who she viewed as a spiritual authority. And she even felt like when she got with God and in prayer that her baptism counted for God. Now, I could sit back and, as a actual spiritual authority, right, and I could say that she's wrong and that I'm right and the spiritual authority is over here. That's what the Sadducees and Pharisees were doing. Or I can turn the other cheek and realize, as Yeshua did, that that authority is such a human-made construct for power, that the actual authority comes only from God directly to man, not through God to another man to be then given to man. When I say man, I'm saying men and women. And that's the other aspect of a lot of the authority within Western Christianity, churchianity today, is it's only really given to men. It's not really given to women. And we bypass it by saying that women have it and their prayers are just as powerful, and a mother's authority is something that's way greater than any priesthood. And that's a bypass. If that's all true, then why can't the women have the authority, right? And so that's obviously a symptom of a patriarchal, hijacked society and churchianity. But the point is, in coming all the way full circle, if you've made it this far, the solution I always talk about is within. The solution is always, how can I come into more direct experience, right? Direct knowledge, direct authority with God and myself, with my higher power, my higher self, and myself here and now, where it's one-on-one, where I'm removing the middleman and I'm coming back into spiritual authority within my own self and spiritual sovereignty. Sovereign meaning I have the ability to choose my own spiritual path. And that doesn't mean that you leave a church. It doesn't mean that you reject prophets and apostles. It doesn't mean that you have disrespect for other spiritual authorities, because I grant their direct connection to God as well, and the roles that they play and the ways in which they're stewarding and fulfilling their callings in life is just as valid as mine. And there's a quote actually from a Mormon prophet that just passed away. One of my favorite quotes when I was deconstructing around religion and authority and all of these topics we've talked about today, trying to figure out what my place was and how I could have a direct experiential relationship with God and with my own life path. And the quote goes something like, "You will not survive spiritually on borrowed light. You won't have the opportunity to rely on parents, prophets, apostles, and their testimonies anymore. You have to actually gain your own. And he goes on to say that you, as the individual, has as much direct permission to receive revelation from God for your individual life as the prophets and apostles do for the church. So that's their stewardship, right? Their stewardship is the church, and a lot of members of that church have a lot of faith in them and almost borderline blind obedience in them to whatever they say goes. Whatever they say over that pulpit goes. There's no question. There's no curiosity. There's no wonder. There's no personal testimony really needed on individual things that they say, because as a whole, they've got the stewardship. But that same prophet from the pulpit said that you have the same exact bandwidth and permission to seek out and receive revelation for your own individual life as they do for the church. And when I read that, I heard that, it hit me as in, oh, I am my own person. And I have my own path, and it might not even sometimes fit within the context of this church or within churchianity, within the hierarchical structure. And that obviously elicits a lot of fear, and a lot of deconstruction is like one of the most fearful things in the world. Because a lot of fear comes up, a lot of shame, a lot of questioning, especially within deconstructing churchianity, because what you're gambling is not being with your family for eternity. What you're gambling is hell, or not the best prize, not the best kingdom. And so that's, to your mind, body, nervous system, that's going to elicit a lot of fear, a lot of shame, and it makes sense. And for those who are deconstructing right now, just know that on the other side of feeling the fear and leaning in with curiosity and trusting your own relationship with God and the own goodness that God inherently is, that it's all going to make sense. And it's funny because those who choose to deconstruction, at least I know from my experience, it's not like we had a choice. It was like things happened in life that just made us look at certain things, and we had to look at it. And you could try to not look at it for as long as you wanted, but experiences just continued to happen in life where it was like, oh, I've got to look at this. Oh, I've got to look at this. And it was like this continual battle, especially at the first of I don't really want to look at that. I will compartmentalize it, or I will bypass that, until eventually it was like, okay, let me look at it. And then it's not that scary. Once I actually would look into it and feel the feelings, and I would come out on the other side realizing oh, I still can choose. I don't have to hate the church or my upbringing. I don't have to be, there's a lot of anti-Mormons out there, and I'm not that. I still actually listen to talks and I go to church occasionally, because I still find that there's a lot of light in it. A lot of it's borrowed light. But I can still find a closeness with spirit there and with God. And I see those fruits also for my children and for my family. So it's something I still participate in. That is a podcast for today. I know I went all over the place talking about authority, churchianity, Christianity. What was Yeshua actually saying? Please leave your comments, questions. If you're interested in really jamming about all of this, Gnosis Rising on the school platform, GNOSIS space Rising, where we talk about authority only for the intention, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, to come into our own spiritual authority to come into our own spiritual sovereignty, because it is essential. I'll echo the words of a prophet. It is essential to survive spiritually, to not lean on borrowed light, and to come into our own spiritual sovereignty and spiritual authority in today's world. And to grant ourselves permission to be able to actually explore and expand spiritually and on our spiritual path. Thank you for tuning in. Much love, and remember to keep smiling.